what's best for my child, and what do I need as a parent without shame? What do I need in order to parent well?
Welcome to the Honestly Adoption Podcast, a show about adoption, foster care, advocacy, and becoming the best caregiver possible. Pull up a chair. We're glad you've joined us. Here are your hosts, Mike and Kristen Berry.
Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Honestly Adoption Podcast. We are so glad you've joined us for this episode. My name is Mike Berry, along with Kristen Berry. We are your hosts for this show. And guys, we are so excited for you to meet our special guest for this episode. Listen, if you've been out and about driving with your kids in the car, you have probably passed by a certain fast food restaurant with the silhouette of a little girl on the sign, and that restaurant would be Wendy's. I know for us, our kids are always asking us, 4 for $4 meal, 4 for $4 meal.
A 4 for $4 meal or a Frosty. I mean,
and I love Frosties.
It's hard to say no, and we are not being paid to advertise Wendy's right now.
Not at all.
Just so that you know.
We're saying that, yeah, it's true. We're not. We're saying this because you may have been to Wendy's before. You may have had a Frosty 4 for $4 meal, but you need to know there is something way bigger behind that restaurant. Something that the founder of that restaurant created and built. And we're going to talk about that today with our special guest, Rita Soronen. She is the director and CEO of the Dave Thomas Foundation. And you guys, this foundation is doing amazing work when it comes to foster care and adoption, as in permanency and advocacy. We're going to talk about all of that with her today. You guys are going to love this interview. We had a lot of fun, and she is just salt of the earth, has a passion for changing this world. You guys are going to get a lot out of this. So here we go on with today's interview. Rita, welcome to the Honestly Adoption Podcast. It is so great to have you with us.
Thank you for having me. I am delighted to be here.
Well, that is good news. I have to say, as we were looking over the interview, I noticed that you're from the Dave Thomas Foundation. We're going to talk all about that. And we love the Dave Thomas Foundation. You guys have shared a lot of our content, and we've shared a lot of yours over the years. So this is going to be a lot of fun.
Yes.
And yeah, we're excited to talk with you.
Great. Good. Well, I am as equally excited to talk with you. Look, when like-minded people are together, whether it's in a room or on a screen, it's a good day.
I agree. So tell us a little bit about yourself and the organization you work for.
Sure. Well, I have the honor of serving as president and CEO of the Dave Thomas Foundation for Adoption. And the foundation is a national nonprofit public charity and was founded by our namesake, Dave Thomas, who I hope everybody remembers was the founder of the Wendy's restaurant, that great square hamburger brand, and Frosties and French fries. But equally important to him was this notion of making sure embedded in that business culture was the notion of giving back. And as he was moving toward the end of his active career as head of the Wendy's company, he also was looking at how could they do that in a much more profound and robust way. And adoption was personal to Mr. Thomas. He was adopted, although as an infant, he was in foster care for a brief period of time. And he had a challenging life, even as an adopted youth. His mother passed away when he was relatively young. He was raised by his grandmother. His father was a bit of an itinerant worker. He moved from place to place, and he actually left home at 16. I mean, his story really sounds like a lot of our older youth who are in foster care, who are waiting to be adopted and move around a lot, live with kin, potentially lose parents, and suddenly have to strike out on their own. So he was very conscious of the conversation of adoption across this country, but really wanted to narrow it down to foster care adoption. In 1992, when the foundation was formed, it wasn't a robust conversation in this country about children in foster care waiting to be adopted, about the system, about the challenges, about the policies and practices. So created us in 1992, gave his name, thankfully, to this organization. but interestingly created it as a national nonprofit public charity. Could have been easy to make it a corporate foundation or a family foundation, but I think he was very wise in one, making it a singular focus. Our mission is to dramatically increase the adoptions of children from North America's foster care system. And two, as a nonprofit organization, we have to hit the road. We have to talk about this organization in order to raise the funds that we need in order to do the work that we do. So in a nutshell, we're a one-trick pony. We work exclusively in that arena of foster care adoption. Of course, we recognize and are a little bit expert in all kinds of adoption because we really celebrate families that come together, whether it's infant adoption or international adoption or step-parent adoption or foster care adoption. But our focus, our mission focus, is really looking at what are the systems here in the United States and Canada, how do they operate, and what are the challenges for those children that we're intending to serve.
Wow, I love it. And I have to say, you mentioned Wendy's restaurants. So my kids are always all about the 4 for $4 meals. That's all we ever hear.
Yeah.
So that's why we're
the advertisement.
We're the advertisement right there. Yeah. Now you guys have a program called Wendy's Wonderful Kids. What are some of the new programs in place with that? We want to hear all about that.
Oh, thank you. Yeah. We started out pretty much as an awareness organization. We were still able to use Dave Thomas's voice and celebrity in order to just elevate awareness about this cause, that people weren't talking about the fact that, tens of thousands of children were in foster care waiting to be adopted. But we moved around 2001, 2002, not away from awareness. We still need to elevate the awareness about these issues and these causes. But we realized as a mission that says dramatically increase the adoptions, behind that number dramatic is something measurable. And on any given day in 2002, if Mike, you had come to me and said, hey, Rita, how many kids did you get adopted today? I would not have been able to tell you. I would have been able to say, we have some great grant making programs. We've got some great awareness programs. But we realized we had to get a little bit more specific and a little bit more actionable. So we began to look at that focused population of children that were most at risk of aging out of foster care, right? Year over year over year, 20,000 children who have been freed for adoption leave the system without an adoptive family. And we know that not because they're bad kids, but there tend to be negative consequences in their life. They're at risk of being homeless or undereducated or underemployed because they don't have that safety net of family. So we began to look at perhaps that's a space, that's a gap that the foundation could step into. And we were looking at existing best practices, what are agencies doing for this population of children? And there wasn't really anything at an evidence-based level. We were still doing websites with children's faces or adoption fairs, or there's sort of, let's hope that charismatically a family finds a child in that method. But it didn't seem to be the appropriate method for children age 9 and older, children in sibling groups, children with special needs, children who've been in care for so long that they don't, when someone asks, they resist efforts at permanency. And that's where that was the impetus behind creating Wendy's Wonderful Kids, which is the brand, because our Wendy's partners, franchisees stepped in. We said, we've got this great idea. We think we can jump into a system and help more kids get adopted if you can help us raise some more dollars. And our Wendy's friends stepped in a big way and helped us do that. So we call it Wendy's Wonderful Kids, but the model is a child-focused recruitment model. And what we said was, we'll give grants to organizations, large or small, adoption organizations, public or private, to use this model, hire a full-time adoption professional to use this model, which really is very simple. It's just good social work. Carry a smaller caseload of the longest waiting children in your community. Get to know each child on your caseload intimately. So regular contact. Find out their journey. What has their journey been? What are their needs and desires and their special needs? Do a deep dive into that case file, because we know that for these children and youth, frequently they've been in care 3 or 4 or 5 or more years. And there are a number of adults that already surround that child, starting with extended family members, but beyond that, teachers and social workers and therapists and coaches and people from, wherever they might go to church. So there are a lot of adults that are already in this child's life. We don't necessarily have to put their face on a website and wait for something to happen. Let's put action behind it and make something happen. And we started with 7 pilot sites in 2004, testing out this model across the nation. It very quickly showed results. It very quickly began to grow. Today, Wendy's Wonderful Kids supports nearly 600 full-time adoption
Wow.
recruiters that do this model in all 50 states and across Canada. So we're really excited about it. And we're seeing, just this past year, we celebrated 10,000 adoptions through the Wendy's Wonderful Kids program.
Wow.
The average age of those children that we're serving hovers around 12. So, and they majority of the children are in sibling groups. The majority of the children have at least one identified special need. Again, those children most at risk of aging out of care are the ones we're successfully serving. So we're excited. We're not at the capacity that we need to be yet. We're scaling in states. We have 12 states now that are scaled, which means we're able to support the number of recruiters that it takes to carry that caseload of that identified group of at-risk children. But we've got a few more states to go. So we're excited about the trajectory, but we've got a lot of work to do.
Well, you just hit on this pain point that I think exists between the idea of adoption and the reality of adoption. And so I love, I had no idea that that's what you were going to say. So my brain is really excited to think about a model that puts the child at the center and that funds actual and a trained adoption worker that could understand the ins and outs of everything that this child has experienced. And begin with the community that already surrounds. One of the things that happens so often in our community, and we are mostly foster and adoptive parents, that's who listens in, that's who reads our content, that's what we do training for. Most people are coming to find our content because they saw something on paper and they thought, that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to be a parent. All I'm going to need to do to help this child heal is extend love. That's all it's going to take. And so I find a couple things interesting in just your introduction when you said that Dave Thomas himself moved out at 16. I hope that all the parents listening in heard that too, that no matter what, our kids have experienced trauma.
Exactly.
Our kids are real people. Our children are processing through the loss of their first family, no matter what age they came into care or into an adoptive home. And so when we have a shift with our adoption professionals and our foster care professionals that puts the child at the center, creates community around children, and educates parents well, we can actually aim for permanency in a different, in a more well-prepared way that might actually result in some sort of permanent family relationship, not just for the 12-year-old we saw on paper, but for the 12-year-old that then becomes, the 50-year-old, the 60-year-old that still has a relationship with a family and a solid foundation. Why is permanency so important?
Part of our work with judges, with social workers, with systems, with child welfare directors is to get past this notion that, first of all, the need for family ends at age 18, right? We've built into our systems this financial incentives and other kinds of strategies that say, well, look, these kids have experienced trauma. They've had a bad start in life, but we'll give them some training and we'll kind of get them out the door and they'll be fine. Well, look, permanency is not about just the adoption finalization in court. It's about a lifelong commitment to family, right? I think of my own daughters who are well beyond, they're thriving adult women. But my youngest, a couple of years ago, was moving from San Francisco to DC. She was going through some just personal challenges in her life. She came home and she stayed with us for almost a year. She was, I think, 28 at the time, that she had that opportunity to just pause and relax into a new phase of her life is what every child should have an opportunity for. But we still say that, well, aging out is okay. These kids need to pull themselves up by their bootstraps and they'll be fine and they'll be better people up for it. Indeed, they're already better people because they've experienced what they've had and they've gone through it and they've figured out a way to stay positive and thriving. But that doesn't mean that that's what should happen. Permanency is about those family connections that we all may take for granted, but assume that everyone has them and they don't. So it is about having a safety net during stressful times, having a safety net during times of celebration. It's about having, extended family members to step in at celebrations, at parties, at graduations, at births, but also to be there when a job is lost or a car's broken down and they just need an extra hand. Look, how many of our kids who have aged out of foster care are just on a thread of existence, right?
Yeah.
They've managed to get a job, but their car breaks down. They can't get to work. Work doesn't understand. They don't care. Sorry, you didn't make it. You're fired. And that thread just breaks in an instant, and they don't have someone to say, help me for a couple of weeks to get back on my feet. So
Yeah.
it's what we all crave. We all crave family connections at however that's defined. But for whatever reason, we're okay denying that to tens of thousands of children each year. And that's what we work against at the Dave Thomas Foundation for Adoption.
Yeah. You said something that really struck a chord with me, and I hope our listeners picked up on this. You said, and I'm not going to do it justice the way you said it, but you said permanency is about family, being connected to a family. It's not just what happens in a courtroom when a judge decides that this adoption is final. And I hope that strikes a chord with our readers, because that really struck a chord with me. We understand permanency, we're big advocates for that. But man, to look at it like that is a very valuable perspective, because I think, and you see this all the time, people celebrating adoptions and, posting pictures on social media, which we do, right? It's awesome. It's an awesome thing, but it's way bigger than that. It's about connection to a family, right? It's more than just what the judge declares, which is really important. And, you also talked about, parenting past 18. We're in that season right now with our kids. A lot of our listeners are working to figure out, because we're parenting children with special needs, we're working to figure out, like, what does it look like? You mentioned a child getting their first apartment. We have a child who is now 20 who has her first apartment, but it's not like parenting ends when they move out. And especially when you're talking about kids with special needs, kids with a trauma history, right? Our advocacy for our children almost kicks into high gear once they graduate and leave home. So let's talk a little bit about that. When it comes to advocacy, you've mentioned that a couple of times. Talk to us a little bit more about that. What does that look like? What's the approach? And what can our parents be challenged with when it comes to advocacy?
Exactly. And it starts from the day, I think, that an adult makes a decision to adopt a child. Well, it certainly starts the day that an adult says, I want to have a family that includes children, whether they're adopted or not, right? How do you find what's best for your children? Because that's always your goal. But with children who are adopted, it's pushed up, or children with special needs, whether they're adopted or not, right? Or it's pushed up a level because we tend to default to the common denominator in this country. What's business as usual? What's normal? And there is no normal anymore. But we have to make sure that there's that personal advocacy. What do I need? What supports do I need as an adoptive parent or a potential adoptive parent, from extended family understanding to the resources that exist in my community to support this, financial or emotional or otherwise. But then, once I have this notion of what's fair and what's just for children, I think that personal advocacy for the parent and for the child and for the family extends to community and potentially policy advocacy, right?
Yeah.
We know that in this country, there are not enough supports for post-adoption. And the reality is, too many people say, well, wait, you got into this, you know what you're getting into, figure it out. Well, no, that's not the case. These are children who have experienced such profound trauma and grief and loss in their lives that no matter what you prepare for, it's probably not going to be enough. And so there have to be supports, again, mental health supports, financial supports for these children and families so that they can continue to grow and thrive in safety. Just one example, we have long supported, just through our national grants program, the Center for Adoption Support and Education, that created this adoption competency course for mental health providers. Before they created that curriculum, there was no standardized training for mental health providers, and mental health providers didn't necessarily understand the dynamics of abuse and neglect, the dynamics of adoption, the dynamics of grief and loss. And so their assistance to families was lacking. Now there's a national evidence-based curriculum that helps provide that, so that when families turn to a counselor, they can be assured that they have someone that knows what their unique issues might be.
Oh.
That's just one small piece. How do we make sure that kids who either age out of foster care, or who were adopted out of foster care at an older age, or who maybe just were in foster care, have the means to go to college? Families that adopt a 15-year-old haven't saved for 18 years to get a child to college. So how do we make sure that all of those supports are in place? And that takes that policy advocacy that's born out of, I think, that personal family advocacy. What's best for my child? And what do I need as a parent? Without shame, what do I need in order to parent well?
Why is this organization important to you, and how did you become involved here?
That's a great question, because at times I sort of hang my head and say, I wasn't adopted. I don't have adopted children in my family, but I was one of those kids that came out kicking and screaming, right? It's not fair. It's not fair for kids. From a very young age, I think I just had this innate sense of justice for children. And people would say, as we've heard, time and again, oh, you'll feel differently when you're an adult. I can tell you, I feel the same way now that I felt when I was 8 about most things related to children. So it was in my path, I think, just organically, but I had the opportunity. I was on a different path entirely, but came back to, I was living in Kentucky at the time, gave birth to my oldest daughter. We had an opportunity to move back to Columbus, Ohio, which I was from. And she was just about 8 months old. I was in between trying to figure out what I wanted to do with my life, in addition to being a parent. There was just this horrendous story of abuse that came out in the press, and an infant died as a result of abuse. Well, I was just keenly tuned to that as a parent, a relatively new parent. And so I started volunteering with what was then the League Against Child Abuse, the Ohio chapter of the Committee to Prevent Child Abuse, in Columbus, Ohio. And that turned into staff positions. And from there, I was able to move after a long period of time of just learning and absorbing, what is this about? What is abuse and neglect? What are the dynamics? What are family situations that drive this? What's the environment around this conversation of vulnerable children and families? And had the opportunity to become the executive director of the local court-appointed special advocate, the CASA program in Columbus, Ohio. And for those that don't know what CASA is, provide trained volunteers to act as guardians ad litem in court and advocate for the best interest of children when they're involved in court proceedings. And so cut my teeth in that world of, okay, prevention efforts have failed. Families are now involved in the child welfare system with social workers and attorneys surrounding them. How do we advocate for those children whose voices are too often lost in that muddle of what goes on in the child welfare system? And was there nearly a decade and really learned much more about the juvenile justice system and the child welfare system and the interactions and the supports and the interweaving of education, healthcare, justice, child welfare, all of those major systems that families have to walk into and don't have any experience of how to navigate that. But while I was there, one of my board members was also a board member at the Dave Thomas Foundation for Adoption. They were going through transition and approached me to see if I might be interested in applying for the job. And I was so honored and so blessed to be chosen to move into this role as president and CEO in 2001.
Wow.
And really then for me, that organic, unplanned, but somehow planned journey of moving from prevention to intervention to now what do we do when all of our efforts have failed and we essentially have today, 125,000 legal orphans in this country who simply need a family and a home. And to be able to do that at a national level, it goes back to that 8-year-old in me that said it's just not fair. And that's been what's behind all of I think whatever program development we've done during my time here is ultimately that voice in the back of my head that's pounding my fist or stomping my feet and saying, that's not fair for children. That's just not fair.
Yeah, I love it because that's how change is made in this world. When you realize, like you said, this isn't fair. I mean, we have a big heart of justice, personally in our family, but then also in the Honestly Adoption Company, because we realize there are a lot of injustices in this world. There are a lot of people hurting, a lot of children broken, and that's where change begins. That's when world change begins. And you're doing that. You've been doing that for 20 years now through this foundation, which is amazing. And I know, I'm sitting here in the kind of putting myself in the role of a listener, thinking, man, listeners are motivated. They're feeling fulfilled right now, or they're feeling filled up and passionate. So let's talk about what they can do, what we can do, to get connected with the Dave Thomas Foundation. How can we support what you guys are doing? We have a global audience in the Honestly Adoption podcast. So tell us what we can do. Motivate us.
And listen, I would, we're very narrowly focused on North America. Know that my heart is global, that there are so many children in need in this world. But I think it's okay to stay narrowly focused right now and make sure that the children in this country are able to have every access to a thriving life. So, there's so many ways to jump in. First and foremost, if you're interested in becoming a foster and adoptive parent, now's as good a time as ever to jump in. We've got a great resource on our website, The Beginner's Guide to Adoption, that folks can download. It's davethomasfoundation.org is the website, and lots of other resources. But not everybody's ready for that step. It does take work to become certified as a foster parent. It takes a lot of work to move into that, adopting a child from foster care. Not everybody's ready for that. So, you can just learn as much as you can about what is this conversation? I may have some myths and misperceptions about who these children are. I may think they're too old, too damaged, too dangerous. It costs too much. It's not for me. It's too complex of a system to jump into. All of those things may be true, but most of them are myths, right? These children are there through no fault of their own. They've been abused, neglected, or abandoned. They are not at fault. And so learn about these children and begin to understand who they are and get away from those myths and misperceptions. But then think about, there are organizations in my community, public and private, that work on behalf of children. If it's not the child welfare system or a private adoption agency, it might be an organization that helps with food insecurity or housing insecurity. All of these issues surround our children in child welfare. So it doesn't just have to be foster care and adoption. So think about stepping up and volunteering, or becoming a CASA volunteer, or volunteering at the adoption agency as a mentor for a child that just doesn't have anyone else in their life that could use just someone to rely on and to confide in. Think about, if you're involved in a faith-based community, make sure that community around you understands these issues and can participate in activities that may support families, right? Families who do adopt sometimes have needs. I just need an extra bed, or I need access to more clothing for this child that the agency just can't provide. And there are many faith-based communities that gather together and begin to, work with individual families, either fostering or adopting, and help with just additional resources or help with support. And then that advocacy level that we talked about. Look, there's one piece of legislation pending right now that the adoption tax credit, making it fully refundable so that any family that adopts gets the full adoption tax credit for their family, no matter what their circumstances are. And right now it's not refundable. And so families that have, lower incomes don't qualify for the adoption tax credit. It's pending right now. So call your congressman or woman and say, and we can get information to you on the pieces of legislation, but I want you to say yes to this. This is important for families so that we can support families who make sure that these children get out of systems and into permanent families.
Yeah.
Everything from just learning more about the conversation and sharing it with the people you interact to becoming a vocal advocate for policies and practices.
There is so much here. And I think that our listeners are going to want to listen again. I think our listeners are going to want to connect with your organization and learn more about this. Every time we do an interview, I am taking notes on the side of things that I want to research later or I want to share with our listeners. And there's so much here, I'm going to have to listen to it again. So yeah. I appreciate your insight and your perspective here. Please share with our listeners where they can connect with you.
Absolutely. First and foremost, davethomasfoundation.org. That's our website. Just incredible amount of resources and information there. They can call us if they have a specific question, 800-ASK-DTFA. But we're also very visible on social media, so that Twitter and Instagram at DTFA, and Facebook and LinkedIn, Dave Thomas Foundation. Yeah. Just engage in that conversation. That's something else they can do. Go on Facebook, ask a question. We've got a great community of folks who love interacting with each other about issues about foster care and adoption as well. So we love connecting with people that are interested in this cause, that share our concern for children, or that are just a little bit skeptical. Why would I jump into this? We love having the conversation just to share information.
Yeah. And we'll make sure that everything that you just mentioned is also connected, also linked in our show notes that accompany us. If people are listening to this through honestlyadoption.com, our main website, it's all there. We'll make sure that everything is linked so you guys that are listening can get connected. And Rita, you have to know you're talking to two full-blooded Buckeyes right here. I'm from Cincinnati. Kristen's from Columbus. Kristen grew up in Columbus. So you mentioned that earlier. Yeah.
I love
so that. Yeah, so we're just this is like talking to family, long lost family right there, So yes, definitely. Awesome. Well, this has been so much fun. Thank you for spending time with us. Thank you for sharing just about the amazing work that Dave Thomas Foundation is doing, that you're championing. We appreciate you.
Mike and Kristen, I am so grateful to you that you're taking this extra step beyond your family to make sure that everyone understands these conversations and invites them in. Congratulations to you. I am so grateful for you.
Thank you for listening to the Honestly Adoption Podcast, a resource courtesy of the Honestly Adoption Company. To learn more about us, visit www.honestlyadoption.com.